afternoon, Canada. It's a huge pleasure to be here and just great to see the amount of entrepreneurial activity and this community up here. So I'm thrilled to be here. Those of you who know me from reading my blog will know that what I try and do as much as possible is take complex subjects and simplify them. And in this particular afternoon's talk, I'm going to try and give you a really simple way to focus your entire team on a common goal and get alignment in every team member. And to do that, I'm going to use this roadmap that I think of to help the startup founder understand their journey. And I think of a startup as having three phases. The first phase, the search of product market fit, very well documented in Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. The second phase is the search for repeatable and scalable, profitable growth machine. And I don't think this has been very well covered, so I'm going to try to cover that for us today. And I will warn you that this is going to be the subject of a full one-day training course that I'm putting together, so I cannot obviously ram a day's worth of material into half an hour, so you'll get a quick sense of what's some of the headline topics there. So I want to use this particular slide as a way to figure out what is a useful thing for us to focus on. And I think it's one of the most important questions for your survival, and it is, when are you going to run out of cash? This graph here shows the timeline of something that I like to see in all of my board decks of when cash is going to run out. And on top of that, you want to do a quick reduction of that by 3 months as to when you next need to be doing your fundraising. And then you want to leverage this date as this key driving point to understand what milestones you have to achieve to be able to have a successful fundraise. And unfortunately, what you'll quickly realize is a pretty horrifying thought, which is the moment you put that up there, you'll recognize that you're in an extreme race against time. And the only way that I believe you can actually pull off that, successfully winning that race, is to be very, very focused and to get rid of all the distracting things and just work on the key things. So the question might be, what should we be focusing on here? And since cash is crucial to your survival, let's use the moment when you're going to run out and the milestones needed for that as the way to successfully get that next round closed there. So one thing I want to point out here is that there is a misconception amongst some early stage founders that automatically your valuation increases over time after you got your first round. Well, I'm sure most of you realize that that's not really true, and actually much more of a reality here is that you have a series of milestones that you have to achieve in order to get the actual valuations to change. And I want to talk about what those milestones are to help you focus in on what has to be done there. So quickly, to help you understand the mind of a VC or a venture capitalist, this chart shows you how they think about businesses, and they think about risk and when has risk been removed from the business. And you can see that if you're a growth stage investor, which is what's shown on this particular slide here, the risk only changes when they get to see clear numbers that prove that you've got a repeatable, scalable, and profitable growth model. And that way they know that they can just pour money in and turn the crank and it will start to produce more money for them. Fortunately, there are other types of investors who are not growth stage investors, early stage investors, who are good at assessing entrepreneurs, markets, products, and guessing a bit more about when risk is being removed. And those are the early stage investors. But you will see that there's a strong correlation that risk does not disappear until you've started to show really good signs of product market fit, and then drops rapidly as you move down this search for repeatable and scalable, profitable growth model. So what you can see on this slide here is your valuation is inversely correlated to the risk, which is not at all surprising. So let's look at your milestone for a successful Series A fundraise, because I think a lot of people in the audience are seed stage companies. And what you'll see here is that you're looking for a number of customers that have purchased. And really, from my standpoint, the really critical thing to look at is, are those customers actually really happy? Are they using the product and would they hate to give it up? Are they seeing the kind of promised benefits that you're saying that they should get out of it? And are they, in a usage standpoint, clearly showing that that usage is either increasing but not dropping off? And ideally, they're going to expand the usage and the churn is low. So this is a pretty hard set of things to achieve, and oftentimes I see people trying to rush on before they've achieved that. But let me come back to that later and explain how important it is to get there. So this next phase is where hopefully I can provide some insight and value for you, which is how to think about going from early product market fit into finding a growth process. And to my mind, the reason why this is so hard is that most product founders these days are product people or tech people, and they've never run sales before, they've never run marketing before, so now all of a sudden they're faced with this tricky challenge of how do I build this machine that is a go-to-market machine in an area that I have no expertise. And if you're successful at that, you're going to have this machine, and this is what a growth investor cares about, that everything's just proven. They don't really care about how your product works. They don't want product demos. They don't want to see many other things about customers, etc. They just care about how proven your machine is. And that's worth knowing when you pitch them. This is the key thing to pitch, is that you've built this machine and how well this machine actually works. And to my mind, as an investor, the number one thing that I believe is the key sign that you actually have gotten there is this graph. This is your bookings graph, not your revenue graph. And it's really important that you recognize the difference between the two. Because if you have flat bookings, you will still have an increasing ARR growth curve. But what we're looking for is that you actually know how to increase your bookings because you've figured out a scalable process where you can hit the accelerator pedal and deploy more people, more money, and increase the growth curve there. So that would result in an exponential growth rather than a flat growth curve. And there's a lot of confusion about what bookings means in a SaaS company. So let me quickly take that term and define it for you the way I think about it. So bookings is net new ARR, and it has three components. It has the new ARR that you got from new customers, the expansion ARR that you got from your existing customers, and then you subtract from that the churn ARR that you lost due to customers that left you. And that's how you measure bookings in a SaaS company. So this is what we're looking to see you're able to increase on a predictable basis when you get given extra cash to invest more in that process then. And by the way, this is the chart that I believe is fundamental to every SaaS startup. If you don't have this chart, please can I recommend that you adopt this as your primary way of looking at whether your business is succeeding or not. And that's basically just graphing those four components from the previous slide over time. And the key line there is the thick red line, and you're looking to see that that's growing over time, because if it's not, something's not working in how you're trying to scale your business, and you haven't yet figured out how to make it scalable. So let's break this phase down into sub-phases. And let's look at the very first thing that one wants to do is close some of your early customers, the first customers. And then, as I mentioned before, it's fundamental that you make them successful before you move on to the next stage. And again, if I can, I see a mistake being made quite often, which is people rush to trying to do the next stage before they've figured out how to make their first customer successful. That, in my opinion, is a mistake that you don't want to have happen to you. So once you have that, then you want to go after trying to find something that's predictable and repeatable. And after that's predictable and repeatable, then you want to figure out how to scale it. So I'm sure many of you are in this situation right now where you're just starting this journey, and the world looks like this to you. There's no clear sales path, and you're looking at this very tricky landscape of how to set up your go-to-market. But when we've finished, what we want is a really well-defined path that is completely understood with a clear sales motion, a clear way of generating leads, a clear way of closing leads, etc. And so where do you start to build that? To my mind, this is a tough thing, but I believe you have to find one target market. A lot of startups really struggle with this because they can't stand the idea of turning away opportunity, people coming at them from many, many different markets. But the problem with that is that if you have too many different use cases, you're going to find that it's not repeatable. You don't have clarity about exactly how you approach a specific market. And you're going to find different messaging for each of these different use cases, different people that you call on, different ways of describing the product, different things that you have to integrate with to make this use case actually work. So this is a tough thing to do, but I believe that one of your first steps is to figure out what is your first market to go after and what the first use case is. And even if it's inside the same vertical, do not go after too many use cases, because again, that's not consistency and repeatability, and you're wanting something that's consistent and repeatable. Once you've got that, you can then figure out your messaging. And again, here's a place where I see founders struggling. They're often so thrilled with the great product that they've built that all they want to do is describe their product. But you've got to remember that customers don't really think about your product. They think about their problem. And so the common switch that you want to make is being able to think about how to message the benefits of this to their particular business, and then describe the features that support that. And again, I see people struggling a lot with making this simple and short. It's very hard to do, so I'm not surprised that it's a struggle, but that would be one of the next steps in this. Then I think what one would typically do is take a guess at what you think the sales process is going to look like. So here's a very simple sales process where we're going to drive people to our website and then leverage a free trial to convert them. And what we're doing when we do this kind of guess is we've got to recognize that we're thinking about this, about the way we would like the sales process to work. So it's a vendor-centric design. And what I believe is really helpful is to see that there's actually a better way to design the funnel, and that is to be very buyer-centric in your thinking. And let me give you some ways of doing that. So top of the list, before you get going with anything further, is try to find a few friendly buyers who are willing to sit down and tell you about how they think about things. What does their boss expect of them? What do they get measured on for success in their business? What are their key pains? How do they think about your product? How would they evaluate it? What key features do they need? And build those buyer persona. And then once you have the buyer persona, you would ask them about how do they think about their buying process, very different to your selling process. And you would ideally diagram the key things that they need to accomplish, like they may need to have a comparison of multiple vendors. They're unlikely to buy just looking at one vendor. They may also want to do an ROI for their bosses as a necessary step to get the funds approved. And so what we're going to do once we have that is try to get inside their head as they go through our process and look at adding steps that help the buyer achieve what they want. So we might do a competitive features matrix to help them with their shortlisting of the competitors. And since many buyers are terrible at producing ROI documents, we might do that work for them and produce an ROI calculator that spits out a really great PowerPoint presentation at the end that they can use to justify the purchase for them. And you'll find some interesting things come up, like they may be very concerned about security or scalability. And so you could do things like thinking of getting a third-party security firm to do an audit of your security, particularly if they've got a good brand name, and actually putting that there straight away so that before they ask that question, you've pre-anticipated that question and helped provide them with some comfort that you handle it correctly. So what I've done in this last few seconds here is talk to you about a way of thinking about funnel design that I call buyer-centric funnel design. I have an entire series of blog posts and slide decks on this topic if it's interesting to you, and I'll do a little bit more on it at the end because I think it is helpful for people. But let me move on from that and come back to this process of how you get your go-to-market system set up. So one of the things that after you've got this idea of how you think you want to sell and who you're going to sell to, we need to fire up some kind of an initial lead source so that we've got traffic flow coming through that we can use to A/B test various different alternatives and test our hypothesis. And for most people, this is often just a simple thing like Google AdWords that you pay for to get some initial lead flow, but something that works there. Once you have it coming in, you then start looking at the conversion problems, the blockage points where things aren't working the way you hoped. And I recommend creating a team that is a different team to what most people think of. Most people think of bringing the sales and the marketing people into this team. But to my mind, in the new world of selling, it's fundamental that you bring the product people in, because now the product team can have the biggest impact on how well this funnel works by changing to touchless conversions, freemium, free products, free trials, etc. And you'll see me focus in on this particular part of the thing at the end of my presentation here. And so one thing that I hear a lot of is, how would I staff this? When should I do various things in the way of hiring here? So the first step here, the closing of the early access sales, is my personal belief that the best people to do this are the founders of the company, as they are the ones who really get the vision and who have the understanding of how best to explain it with passion. And if they can't sell it, then we've got an issue on our hands, which is really, there's no point in hiring salespeople because you need to know what to train the salespeople on or how to get them going before they can be effective. And if the founders can't sell it, it's probably evidence that you don't have product market fit and need to keep working on that first. But once you've done that, I then believe you need a special kind of salesperson, sometimes called the first-in salesperson, but maybe a better way of thinking about that name for them is a trailblazer or a pathfinder person. And the difference between them and an ordinary person is that there is no path to find through the woods at all when you hire them. Whereas when you hire other salespeople, you've generally got a well-defined motion, and the last thing you want them to do is start playing around with that motion and experimenting. You've spent a lot of time and money and effort to create this motion. You want them to follow it. So that's why these are so different to your later sales hires. And generally, if the founders are technical and have no prior experience, I think you're probably best off, if you can, to hire one of the first two people as a sales director. They initially act as a salesperson until you've got something figured out, and then later on go into a mode of hiring and acting like a sales manager. But they will at least have a better sense of how to recognize the feedback and signals that you're getting from the market as you're testing out your sales process there. So I think I already covered this here. The Pathfinder Trailblazer salespeople have to create and evolve the playbook, which target market, who to sell to, what messaging might be working best, what sales motion to try, what kind of pricing will work best for the customer, and what new product features are needed potentially to change the sales cycle and make it a lot better. By the way, am I responsible possibly for the sound issue that we seem to be having? Either that or there's an earthquake going on that we need to be worried about. Hopefully not me. So one question that you might have here is, when are you ready to hire the next salespeople? Well, ideally, you should believe that you've got a repeatable process, something that you actually are confident that you could teach to another salesperson, particularly not a Pathfinder Trailblazer type of salesperson. And then the last thing you should check on is, do you feel confident that the unit economics will work? This is something I wrote a lot about in the early days. LTV should be more than 3 times CAC as a rough guideline, and months to recover CAC should be less than 18 months ideally. You may not have it at that level, but you should see a way where that would make sense for you. Otherwise, your pricing may be off, and you may need to make some changes there. So I do want to have some simplicity brought to this whole thing. And one of the coolest things here is when I can bring in a single formula and reduce a SaaS business to a single formula. And I think I can for you here. And that formula is what drives bookings. It turns out to be very, very simple math. It's how many salespeople have you got, assuming you're a sales touch business versus a touchless business, multiplied by what is your average productivity per rep. And now that we know that really incredibly powerful, simple formula, let's drill into the components in turn. So it turns out that one of the most common reasons that I see my portfolio companies consistently failing to meet target is because they didn't hire salespeople fast enough. And so this actually is a huge challenge. It's not that easy to hire salespeople. So one of the things that you're going to find is you're going to have to get really excellent at recruiting at the point where you start to switch into this repeatable, scalable process here. And I have an entire blog post that's dedicated to looking at the recruiting process. And in particular, one of my top recommendations for you in that is that you recognize you need to bring recruiting in-house. You have to have your own experts to do it. You cannot rely on third parties to do that for you at that point in time. So let's look at some metrics here. The first one is simple. You can see what your plan was for how many reps you should have hired, and in blue is how many have you actually hired. So you should track that as part of your board deck if you want my recommendation on it. And then you want to look at sales capacity, which is the multiplier of how many reps you have times this quota that you've assigned to them. And you can see that the dotted line there on the right-hand side is the plan number that we wanted to get to. But because we didn't hire fast enough, our actual assigned quota is lower than that. And then, since we're now tracking actual bookings, you'll see that we're coming in below the assigned quota. It's not surprising. You're not always successful at getting every salesperson to be fully productive. So here you can see we've lost bookings due to slow hiring, and it's very meaningful. We've lost $500K in bookings, which, given its recurring revenue, is a big deal. And the second insight you get from this is what's the over-assignment of quota that looks like the key thing for forecasting going forwards? Because once you know that on average you only actually hit 85% of your assigned quota, then when you plan next year, you will recognize that you have to have greater quota capacity than you actually want in your business plan to achieve that number. So let's look at the second variable. We talked about number of sales reps multiplied by PPR, productivity per rep. This is super important, and it's very dependent on the quality of hire, which is back to that recruiting thing. If you have a great recruiting process, you have a great chance of being able to hire great people. But it's also very dependent on your sales training and onboarding. And so here, it's my recommendation that founders get involved in the creation of the sales onboarding training course and training materials. It's often viewed by them as being, all right, we'll just hire those guys and they'll turn up and they'll automatically figure out how to sell our product. Well, it turns out it's really hard if you're a new salesperson to get all the knowledge that you have about why customers buy, what objections they come up with, etc. So there's a very high payback from investing carefully in this onboarding of your salespeople and creating great training materials for them there. So one of the charts that I find extremely helpful is this one. This shows every sales rep you've ever hired, quarter by quarter, with the percentage of quota that they achieved, with the green when they've gone over 100, yellow when they're in a reasonable ratio, and red when they've gone below a certain threshold. So you can at a glance see what you're looking for, and what you're looking for is in the last column there. You'll notice that most of the people are green, and that tells me the critical thing I'm looking for, which is you have found a way to repeatedly add new salespeople to your sales organization and consistently get them to be productive. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's super easy to throw this chart up here, but actually very, very hard to accomplish that. So focusing on that's super important. But there's one other thing that drives productivity per rep, and that's having enough lead flow for the reps to actually work on. And so the way you work this out is pretty simple. You can look at your conversion rates in your funnel in reverse, and you will recognize that to get one deal closed, we will need X number of marketing qualified leads just by running reverse math on that funnel conversion rate. And then we can look at how many total number of deals we need for all the salespeople, and that effectively becomes the number of marketing qualified leads that are required to be driven by marketing and sales development reps, and that should become the contract between your sales group and your marketing group. And if you don't have this contract, you're going to have a lot of anger from the sales group that marketing's not doing their job, anger from the marketing job, the people that the sales is not doing their job, and this is the crucial element here, is getting them to resolve that around this particular contract here. So let's go back to this roadmap and these three phases here and see if there are other lessons we can learn. So the number one mistake that we see people making is jumping ahead of the step that they're in by trying to force progress, jumping ahead doing that. And so common variations of this is they hire salespeople before the founders have proven that they can sell the product. That's kind of a waste of money. They try and scale sales before they figured out how to get the customers really happy with the product and stop the churn problem that they may have. Or they scale the sales force before the process is remotely predictable and repeatable. And all of these things are basically a quick way to burn cash and accelerate the time that you're going to run out of money. And what we've learned here is that these first phases of searching for product market fit and early stages of building this repeatable, scalable process, they're very unpredictable as to how long they will take. So my strong recommendation is that you are in a massive cash conservation mode. You only hire and spend money when you absolutely have to, and you're finding ways to extend your runway because you don't have any really clear time frame. You might create a plan that says we're going to find product market fit in 6 months, but good luck, because what I've seen is it's almost always longer than what you originally thought. And same with the search for a repeatable model then. Commonly, though, an interesting thing happens when people get to scaling the business, which is it's such a hard mind shift to make from saving money to all of a sudden having to hit hiring targets and be aggressive about hiring that people fail, and they don't make that shift in the mindset and recognize that they've hit the point where they actually need to go into scaling mode because everything's now proven. And this was one of the funniest board meetings that we had at HubSpot in the early days when we, the board, turned around to them and told them that they had to start hiring 2 salespeople per month. And they were literally horrified because they'd gone to so much effort to not hire and keep the expenses constrained. It was a difficult moment for them to change into that mindset there. So what would you look at as the milestones for a successful growth round? Assuming that you have a big TAM and good founders, what your VCs, investors, are going to look for is, first of all, strong evidence of product market fit, so good usage metrics over time and low churn. Then they're going to want to look at this predictable, repeatable, and scalable process. And one of the ways that I mentioned was they're going to look at growth in your bookings. Can you consistently show that you know how to grow your bookings number? Can you grow the sales organization? So when you add new salespeople, can you make them productive predictably? And do you have proven lead sources that can scale as you need to scale the business as well? And lastly, they're going to look at, is this profitable? And there again, I go back to the unit economics that I've been preaching for a long time. Lifetime value should be greater than 3 times CAC. Months to recover CAC, less than 18 months or so would be good targets. You may not be yet there, but as long as you can show you're going to get there quite soon, that'll help. So let me end here by having a bit of fun with you, because I think one of the big things, I talked about how important the product group is. If you're a buyer, I think you hear other speakers talking about this. The buyer really wants to do the selling process themselves. They hate salespeople, they hate being sold to. And one of the best ways to do this is, if you can, is use your product as your salesperson, which is what a freemium business model is. So I want to walk through something really important that I was taught a long time ago by Gail Goodman, the founder of Constant Contact, which is you should look at the time to wow. And let's define wow here. So I think there's 2 kinds of wow. I think there's a mini wow moment when your buyer sees something kind of fun and exciting and slightly rewarding that motivates them to continue with the trial. But the full wow moment is when they've actually seen the proof point that they need, that your product really solves their problem and convinces them that they're now happy and ready to recommend it to buy. So I'm going to use, well, actually, before I jump to the example, let's talk about what we want to do. We want to ask how many steps are there, how much time does it take, and how much friction, pain involved is there for the buyer to go through to get to wow. And then we want to remove steps and remove friction. And I have one of my portfolio companies, a company called Salsify, that I want to walk through as an example of how this might work. So what is Salsify? So think about yourselves as people who go to buy stuff from e-commerce sites. The kind of things that really matter when you're looking at an e-commerce site is this rich content, a description of video, reviews, specifications, accessories, photos. And if you think about it, it's actually pretty hard for these e-commerce sites to get all that content. That's difficult to get. And if you're a brand, you have a difficult process to assemble all that content, but your worst problem is that every one of these portals that you deal with wants your information in a completely different format. Amazon's format is not the same as Best Buy's, not the same as Outerarmor or B&H. And so it's a pain, and what Salsify does is they sit in between both of those players and automate the process of moving that product content backwards and forwards. So let's look at their original trial experience. You signed up on the website, and they then took your sign up and created a brand new sandbox for you to use as your demo. And they then later on emailed you to tell you your sandbox was ready. And then you opened up their application. You had to learn what the app did and learn the UI. And then you had to do something painful, which is locate your content that might exist in multiple different places in your company and then import it into Salsify before you could see the product and how it worked. And then lastly, to really get the true wow moment, you had to find evidence that Salsify was going to generate new revenue for you. And the best way for that to happen would be to sign up a brand new retailer and just pour that content straight into that new retailer, which would immediately result in new sales for you. So that was the whole process. Now we sat down and we looked at it in detail. So this is the landing page that they started with that was full of painful fields for people to fill in. And then you got an email coming back sometime later telling you that you can actually go into the trial. Then you get into the trial, but hey, look at this screen. Isn't this a pretty unfriendly screen? There's nothing here. You can't do anything because you've got no products loaded. So that's pretty painful. So what we did was we went and highlighted in red all the painful steps with friction and effort involved for the buyer. So let's look at the first one here. The fact that you could not immediately, from the moment you wanted to start doing the free trial, actually enter it, and you had to wait for this email, that's a pretty painful thing, because you've lost the momentum that you have at that moment in time. So we got rid of that by having an immediate provisioning process. But then you get dumped into the, so actually let me just show you the new design process. So the first thing here is, it's simple. It's just the email address needed there. But you'll see some other steps on here that are kind of cool on the sign-up page, is you can definitely get in the buyer's head and recognize that putting in your email address and hitting continue is a bit of a worry moment for people. So how do you get them over that worry? You show them other customers that have done it, so it's social proof that this is actually a safe thing to do and people have really liked this product. And then you still, unfortunately, were stuck with this nasty problem of landing in the app and not having anything to work on there. So let's go back to this ugly step here, locating and exporting content to get some data into the app to play with it. Well, the key thing that you can do here is put some sample data in and let them play with that. It's not the same as playing with their own data, but at least it gives them some taste for the experience and whether it's going to be worthwhile to go through the hassle of bringing in their own content. And so that gives them the motivation to go through that next step there. So that's what they did next, was they put in a thing saying explore with some sample data. Then you run into this next step here, which is you drop them into this powerful product, and there's a huge risk that they will navigate the wrong way through this product and not get directly to the wow moment that you want them to reach in the shortest period of time. So the answer to that was to introduce guided navigation into the product to really be sure that they went through the series of steps that we can get them to wow as quickly as possible there. And also human help available if needed down at the bottom there. And the net result of those few tweaks was a 3x improvement in the number of people that converted to taking some action after signing up for the trial. So some significant changes there. But we still have some big problems here. The biggest one being this painful process of talking to other people in the organization to get them to give you the content that you needed to then import it into Salsify to make it work. So actually, I apologize. I've stepped ahead of myself here. I apologize. So the step that's currently still needed and painful that I want to talk about is the one of having to go and sign up a new retailer, because that's how you can prove to them that Salsify will drive new revenue. And here the difficulty is that to sign up somebody, that's about contract negotiations, pricing negotiations, purchasing involved, lots of time delay. You don't want that time delay in your trial process at all to get to wow. So a lucky thing happened for them. Google recently introduced a cool new thing for brands called Google Manufacturing Center. And if you as a brand upload your product information to Google, they will create a guided search that's very product-oriented. And their goal is to try and take away the first place people go to search for products away from Amazon and bring it back to Google. But they will effectively, if you take the trouble to upload your product content there, will drive new business for you, coming out of searches that people are doing on Google for those products then. So this was pretty cool because now, instead of having to go and sign up a brand new retailer, Salsify were able to create a relationship with Google where they could instantly create that account for this new buyer and upload some content straight to Google Manufacturing Center and show that they could drive new revenue immediately from just that one export right then and there. So that solved that big problem there. And it left us with the very last problem, which is this ugly one I've been talking about, which is how do they get their data into the system here? And so they looked at this harder again and realized that there was a cool opportunity to find that data in its existing retailers that this company would be working with on the web and get out there and scrape that content and enter it automatically. And it wouldn't be perfect, it wouldn't be in 100% great form, but my God, what a difference between giving them a blank screen with no data in it and presenting them what data is currently available. It would immediately highlight to them all of the things that are missing to have grade A content that really helps you get the SEO and sales working then. So they got rid of that with the scraping of content, eliminated the whole step of playing with sample data because you're now playing with your own data. And we cut that complex process down to this very simple single step. You arrive in the product, you see your own data magically, you see the issues with it, you may fix some of them, you export to Google and you get new sales immediately. So hopefully that's kind of a cool example that shows you how when I talk about getting inside your buyer's head, this is what it really looks like. You want to draw the micro steps that are creating all the friction and pain in your buyer's head as they go through the process you want them to experience, and realize that by being in their head, you can actually massively redesign and improve what they experience when they interact with you as a company. So hopefully that is helpful as just an illustrative example of it. And this is one of the other last things here is I think you really want to try to get rid of that sign up, which is the email address, because that is definitely a drop-off point as well. And so if you can, give people the wow moment first and then sign them up later on after they've seen some benefit from your product here. So let me summarize what I've been trying to talk about here. The essence of what I've been saying is recognize where you are in your life cycle using this three-phase model. And don't jump ahead of where you are. This model gives you a perfect picture of what is the next milestone that you can get the whole team focused and aligned on. And make sure you know when you're going to run out of cash, and make sure, ideally, that you don't run out of cash before you hit that next milestone. Because if you do, you want to quickly run out and get either some venture debt to extend your runway or an extra seed extension or something like that to make sure you can really get through to that next valuation milestone there. Otherwise, you're going to likely have a painful fundraising experience. And use that cash out date and the milestones that your next round is going to require as a perfect way to drive focus and alignment in your team. And I think you'll find this works incredibly well as a great way to bring the organization into complete alignment. The product people, the customer success people, the developers, the salespeople, the marketing people, everybody should start to understand how they play a role in driving that bookings growth there. So thank you so much for the time here.